The evening was quiet in the small Oregon town. The air outside was cool, and leaves rustled faintly against the windows of Emily's home. Inside, the kitchen was warm with the smell of roasted chicken, buttered bread, and a hint of rosemary. Emily moved with practiced care, placing dishes on the wooden table she had owned for years. Every detail was done with love. The folded napkins, candles burning gently, the small vase of flowers she had picked earlier from the garden. Dinner wasn't grand, but it was comforting, and for Emily, it was her way of showing care. Her son Daniel sat across from her, his posture slightly tense. He had always been the one to make her laugh when silence lingered, but that night he was quiet. At 26, Daniel had grown into a man who carried the city's sharp edges in his style. Yet the soft warmth of home still clung to him. He had returned a few months ago after years away, and while Emily was overjoyed to have him near again, she could sense he was holding something inside. Daniel pushed the food on his plate with his fork, but did not eat. His eyes often drifted toward the window, where the fading light of the sunset cast long shadows across the room. His mother noticed the way his jaw tightened, how his lips pressed together as though keeping back words that wanted to break free. Emily's heart, always attuned to her son, picked up on the heaviness in the air. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly, trying to keep her tone light. She reached for her glass of water, watching him carefully. "Is everything all right?" Daniel looked up briefly, his eyes meeting hers before quickly turning back to the candle between them. For a moment the flames flickered across his face, highlighting a mixture of hesitation and longing. "I'm fine," he murmured. Though his voice carried the weight of something deeper, Emily didn't press further, but inside her thoughts ran fast. She remembered how, as a boy, Daniel could never hide his feelings. When he was worried, his eyes gave him away. When he was excited, he spoke too fast to be understood. As a man, he had learned to mask his emotions better, but to Emily, who had raised him alone after his father left, every change in his expression still spoke volumes. Dinner continued in near silence. The ticking of the old clock on the wall grew louder, and the crackle of the fireplace filled the room. Emily tried to fill the silence with small comments about the food, the neighbors, even the weather. But Daniel only nodded. Something was clearly on his mind at last. He set his fork down. The clink of metal against porcelain sounded louder than usual. His shoulders slumped as though he had been carrying an invisible weight for too long. His hands fidgeted, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Mom," Daniel said, and immediately the air shifted. Emily froze, her heart quickening. His tone was different, serious, almost fragile. She leaned in without realizing it, her breath caught in her throat. "Yes, Daniel," she whispered. He swallowed hard, his eyes still fixed on the candle as though gathering strength from its flame. "There's something I need to tell you." The words hung in the air, sharp yet uncertain. Emily felt her stomach tighten. For weeks, she had sensed something unspoken between them, but now it seemed the moment had arrived. A moment that could change everything. Her mind ran ahead, wondering, was it about his job? Had he left the city because of failure or some unseen trouble? Or was it about his health? Fear touched her heart. She wanted to reach across the table and grab his hand, to reassure him that nothing he said could change her love for him. But she stayed still, waiting. The silence stretched. The fire crackled. The candle flickered. Daniel finally raised his eyes to hers. His gaze was glassy, uncertain, and full of vulnerability. Emily's breath caught again. She had not seen that look in years, not since he was a teenager confessing mistakes he was afraid she would be disappointed in. "Daniel," she said gently, her voice trembling though she tried to hide it. "What is it? You can tell me anything." He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. His hands clenched together in his lap. His chest rose and fell quickly. It was clear he was fighting against the fear of being misunderstood. Emily felt her own heart pounding harder, her maternal instinct screaming to comfort him. But she knew that sometimes silence was the greatest gift, that allowing space for truth was more powerful than filling it. With her own words, the clock ticked. The fire whispered. Finally, Daniel's lips parted again. His voice, though soft, carried the kind of honesty that could not be undone. "I've been carrying this for a long time," he said. Emily felt the room tilt. The warmth of the kitchen seemed to blur with the cool air pressing against the windows outside. She realized she was holding her breath. Her son's tone was not casual. It was confessional. And in that moment, she knew that whatever came next would not be simple. It would not be light. It would shake something deep inside her, something she could not yet name. She forced herself to smile, to stay calm. "Then don't carry it alone anymore," she whispered. "Tell me." Daniel's lips pressed together. His eyes flickered with conflict, fear, hope, love, and doubt all tangled together. The moment hung suspended, fragile and heavy, as though the entire house was listening, waiting, holding its breath. Emily didn't know yet what he would say, but she knew her life was about to change. The clink of Daniel's fork against the plate lingered in the air. The roasted chicken, once warm and inviting, now sat untouched between them. Emily watched her son's hands tremble slightly as he pushed his plate away. He leaned back in his chair, his shoulders heavy, his eyes lowered. The glow of the candles lit his face, but shadows carved deep lines of worry. Emily wanted to speak, to tell him that no matter what weighed on him, he didn't need to fear her judgment. Yet she stayed quiet. She had learned long ago that sometimes silence was the safest place for truth to find its way out. Daniel exhaled. Oh, long and shaky breath. His fingers twisted together in his lap as though he was holding himself steady. "I've been carrying this for a long time," he finally said, his voice low, each word dragging out of him with effort. Emily's heart quickened. The seriousness in his tone pressed against her chest like a stone. She leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting on the table. "Then maybe it's time to let it out," she whispered. Daniel's lips curved in a faint, almost pained smile. "It's not that simple." His voice cracked just enough to reveal how fragile he felt. The fire popped in the fireplace. The clock ticked steadily on the wall. Emily felt the stillness of the house close around them as though everything was listening to this moment. Her mind raced. Was it about his health? Was he in trouble? Had something happened in the city that drove him back home? The possibilities tumbled one after another, each heavier than the last. But she didn't ask again. She knew pushing too hard would only close him off. Instead, she softened her expression and said gently, "Daniel, I've known you your whole life. I've seen every version of you, from the boy who scraped his knees running in the yard to the young man who tried so hard to make his own way in the world. There is nothing you could say that would make me stop loving you." His eyes lifted at that, just for a moment, and she saw the fear in them. Fear of rejection. Fear of disappointment. Fear that love might not be enough. "I've fallen in love," he said suddenly. The words broke free as if he could no longer hold them inside. Emily froze. Her heart skipped. The sentence was simple, yet it landed with the weight of something deeper. She expected joy to follow love was a gift, after all. But his voice did not sound joyful. It carried hesitation, almost sorrow. Her fingers tightened around her glass, steadying herself. "Love," she echoed softly. "Daniel, that's not something to fear." Daniel shook his head, his expression tightening. "It's complicated, Mom." His voice lowered as though even the walls of the house might betray his secret. "I wasn't sure if I could ever tell you, because I didn't know how you'd feel about it." Emily's chest ached. She had imagined many reasons for his unease, but this struck differently. His words carried the kind of weight people carried when their hearts were caught between joy and shame. She leaned closer, her voice tender. "Love should never be a secret that breaks you. Who is it, Daniel?" Daniel dropped his gaze to the flickering candle again. The flame danced in the reflection of his eyes, but his lips pressed together. He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched until it nearly broke Emily's patience. But she bit down on the urge to press further. Instead, she placed her hand on the table, palm open, waiting for him to take it if he needed comfort. He didn't move, but his shoulders eased just slightly, as though her quiet presence gave him strength. I thought I could hide it, he finally admitted, his voice softer now. I thought maybe if I kept it to myself it would fade. But it hasn't. It's only grown stronger, and I can't pretend anymore. Not with you. You've always seen through me. Emily's heart softened. He was right. She had always been able to read him, even when he didn't want her to. And now, looking at his trembling hands and the way his chest rose and fell too quickly, she knew this wasn't a fleeting crush. This was something real. Her voice was steady, though her heart raced. Then trust me, Daniel. Tell me who it is. Let me carry this with you. He looked up at her again, and for the first time that night, she saw not just fear but also hope in his expression. His lips parted, but no sound came. It was as if the name itself was locked inside him. Too powerful to release, Emily reached out further, her hand now covering his trembling fingers. You don't have to be afraid of me, she said softly. Daniel's throat moved as he swallowed. His eyes glistened, but he did not cry. Instead, he drew in a breath and whispered, "It's someone you know." The words hit Emily like a sudden gust of wind. She blinked, stunned. Someone she knew. Her thoughts spun rapidly through faces, neighbors, old friends, colleagues, even family friends who had been part of their lives for years. Her lips parted, but no words came. She was suspended in shock, staring at her son, trying to read the truth in his eyes. Daniel looked at her with desperation, as if silently begging her to understand. I know this is a lot, he said, his voice cracking. I didn't want to keep it from you forever. But I had to tell you. I couldn't live with the silence anymore. Emily's breath caught. Her mind screamed with questions, but her heart urged her to be gentle. She didn't want him to retreat now. The candle flickered. The clock ticked on. The room felt smaller, heavier, like the walls themselves leaned in closer to hear. Emily finally whispered, her voice trembling, Daniel. Who is it? But Daniel only shook his head slightly, as though saying the name would change everything too quickly. His silence was not refusal, it was fear. Fear of what her reaction might do to the bond they had always shared. And so they sat there, the truth hovering just out of reach. The night deepening around them, a mother and her son, locked in a moment where love was both the bridge and the wall between them. The room was heavy with silence. The flickering candle between them seemed louder than their breathing, its flame swaying as if it too was restless. Emily kept her eyes fixed on her son, waiting, bracing herself. Daniel's words from moments earlier, "It's someone you know," echoed in her mind, refusing to fade. Her heart pounded. She tried to steady her thoughts, but names rushed through her head like water breaking through a dam. Neighbors, friends from church, colleagues from her years at the school, people who had sat at this very table before. Her imagination spun with endless possibilities, none of which seemed to fit, yet all of which felt too close to ignore. Daniel rubbed his hands together, his fingers restless, his jaw tight. He looked younger in that moment, almost like the boy she used to soothe after nightmares. Emily wanted to reach across and hold him again, but she stayed still. She understood this was his moment, and he needed to own it, even if it terrified him. Finally, he opened his mouth. His voice was barely above a whisper. He paused, his throat tightening. His eyes darted away, finding safety in the soft glow of the fireplace. He tried again. "It's someone you've known for a long time." Emily felt her stomach twist. Every second of silence stretched longer than the last. The suspense was unbearable, yet she couldn't rush him. She nodded slightly, urging him without words. Daniel inhaled sharply, then released the name. Emily froze. The sound of it hit her like a wave crashing against rock. The name was not foreign, it was familiar, intimate, woven into the fabric of her life. She repeated it silently in her mind, unable to stop herself. The room seemed to grow colder, though the fire still burned bright. Her breath caught. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her mind tried to make sense of it, how, when, why. The revelation was not what she had expected. It was both too near and too impossible. She had thought of dozens of possibilities, but never this one. Daniel's eyes searched hers desperately, his voice trembling. "Mom, I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't plan it. But I can't deny what I feel anymore." Emily blinked, still caught in the shock of it. Her son's confession filled the air with weight, making even the simplest sounds like the ticking clock feel unbearably loud. She wanted to speak, but her lips refused to form words. She looked at him, really looked. His face carried honesty, pain, and an unshakable truth. He wasn't joking. He wasn't confused. He was standing in front of her as a man in love, confessing something that had clearly consumed him. Her chest tightened, and she finally whispered, "Daniel." The name carried both love and disbelief. Daniel leaned forward, urgency spilling from him. "I know what you're thinking. I know this isn't what you expected. But I couldn't keep it from you anymore. Every dinner, every conversation, I've been hiding it. And it's been eating me alive." Emily's thoughts raced. She remembered gatherings, casual conversations, small moments where perhaps she should have noticed something different in his eyes. But hindsight was always clearer. And now she realized he had been carrying this secret right under her roof, trusting her enough to finally bring it into the open. Her voice trembled, but she managed to ask, "How long, Daniel?" His answer was immediate. "A year." His eyes glistened, raw and unshielded. "It started as friendship, as respect. But it grew, and I couldn't stop it. I tried to fight it. I tried to pretend, but the truth never left me. And now I don't want to hide it anymore." Emily pressed her hand against her chest, steadying her breath. She felt the room closing in, yet at the same time, she sensed a shift in her sooner release, as though speaking the truth had lifted a weight he had carried too long. The name still echoed in her mind, circling with questions she wasn't ready to voice. What did this mean for him, for her, for their family? Daniel reached across the table suddenly, his hand trembling as it covered hers. "Please, Mom, say something. I need to know what you feel. I need to know if I've just broken everything between us." Emily's throat tightened. She could see the fear in his face, fear that love, the very thing that should be beautiful, might now divide them. And in that fear, she also saw the courage it had taken for him to say the words aloud. The fire crackled again, and the shadows on the walls stretched longer. Emily took a slow breath. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice soft but heavy, "you've given me a truth I didn't expect tonight. My heart is shaken." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But you are my son. Nothing you say will make me stop being your mother." Tears filled Daniel's eyes, though he fought to hold them back. Relief flickered across his face, though it was tangled with worry. Emily squeezed his hand. Though her mind was still spinning with confusion, she didn't have all the answers, not yet. But she knew this. She would not let him face this truth alone. The candle between them burned lower, wax slowly pooling at the base. The dinner plates sat cold, forgotten, as the two of them sat locked in a moment of raw honesty. Emily didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how she would face the many questions now stirring in her soul. But as she looked at her son, she knew one thing with certainty. Their bond was strong enough to hold, even when the truth shook her to her very core. And yet, as the clock ticked past another hour, one thought lingered unspoken. If love could grow in silence for so long, what storms might follow now that it had finally been spoken aloud? The room felt suspended in time. The food on the table had gone cold, but neither Emily nor Daniel noticed. Their world had shrunk to that small circle of candlelight between them, where silence carried as much weight as words. Emily's heart was still unsteady from the name Daniel had confessed, a truth that rattled her core, yet her gaze stayed fixed on her son. Daniel's hand rested on hers, his grip uncertain, as if afraid she might pull away. His eyes, glassy with unshed tears, searched her face for an answer. For so long he had carried the secret alone, and now that it was out, the fear of her judgment pressed against him like a tide threatening to drown him. Emily took a breath, steadying herself. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling but soft, "you've carried this too long by yourself." Her words cracked the air, but gently. Daniel closed his eyes, a small shiver of relief running through him. His shoulders, tense all evening, seemed to ease slightly. "I didn't want to disappoint you," he admitted. "I was terrified you'd look at me differently." Emily's throat tightened at his words. She thought back to years past, the scraped knees, the teenage mistakes, the triumphs and heartbreaks he had once brought to her kitchen table. She had never turned him away then, and she would not now. "You could never disappoint me for being honest about your heart, Gus," she said, her hand tightening on his. "Love isn't easy, Daniel. Sometimes it comes where we least expect it. Sometimes it frightens us. But it doesn't make it wrong." Daniel's eyes shone, and though no tears fell, the emotion in them was clear. "I needed to hear that," he whispered. Emily's own heart still carried questions, so many questions. How would this change things? What challenges would it bring? Could she accept this fully? The answers weren't ready yet. But what she knew in the deepest part of herself was that love, whether a mother's love for her son, or the love he now confessed deserved compassion, not silence. The fire snapped in the hearth, scattering soft sparks that glowed and faded. Outside, the night deepened, wrapping the house in stillness. Inside, a quiet understanding settled between them. "You were brave to tell me," Emily said, her voice steadier now. "It takes courage to speak the truth when you fear it will change everything." Daniel's lips trembled into the faintest smile. "It feels like I can breathe again. For so long I thought I had to hide. But the hiding was worse than the fear." Emily nodded slowly, understanding more than he realized. She had lived her own life with secrets, once things she never spoke aloud. She knew how silence could become a burden, pressing harder every day. Looking at Daniel now, she felt a mix of pride and tenderness. He had chosen honesty, and in doing so, he had chosen to trust her with the most fragile part of himself. "I don't have all the answers," she admitted honestly, "but I promise you we'll walk through this together." Daniel's shoulders lowered further, the tightness in his expression softening into something lighter. "That's all I need, Mom," he said quietly. "To know you're still with me." Emily gave a faint laugh, though her eyes glistened. "I've been with you since the moment I first held you in my arms. Nothing changes that." The words landed gently, but powerfully. For the first time that evening, Daniel's posture shifted from guarded to open. His hands relaxed, his breathing steadied. He looked across the table, not with fear, but with the quiet relief of being seen and still accepted. The candles burned lower, the wax pooling at their base. The roasted chicken and warm bread no longer mattered. What mattered was the truth spoken aloud, and the bond between mother and son that had withstood it. Emily leaned back in her chair, her thoughts still restless, but her heart firm. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or what conversations would follow. But she did know this: love deserved to exist in the light, not buried in shadows. For Daniel, the act of confessing was not the end, but the beginning. For Emily, hearing the confession was not about having all the answers, but about choosing love over fear. The old clock ticked steadily in the background, marking the passing of minutes that felt strangely eternal. Emily let the quiet linger for a while before speaking again. "Daniel," she said softly, "you may have shaken me tonight, but you've also reminded me of something important. Love isn't meant to be hidden. Even when it surprises us, even when it's complicated, it deserves the chance to be real." Daniel exhaled slowly, as though her words had unlocked a door he had been trapped behind for too long. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for not turning away." Emily reached out again, this time with both hands, holding his firmly. "Never," she said. The fire dimmed, the candles melted lower, and the night deepened outside. Yet in that little dining room, warmth lingered not from the food or the flames, but from the bond between mother and son, now stronger than silence, steadier than fear. Emily knew questions would remain and challenges would come, but she also knew that tonight marked a turning point. Her son had chosen truth, and she had chosen love. And in the end, that was enough to begin. Emily Parker believed the family trip would fix everything. For months, she and her husband Mark had lived like polite strangers, sharing the same roof but not the same life. Their teenage son Ethan noticed it too, the way silence replaced laughter at dinner. So, when Mark suggested a weekend getaway to the mountains, Emily took it as a sign of hope. Maybe they could find each other again, away from the noise of work and worry. She packed carefully, choosing his favorite coffee, Ethan's hiking boots, and the red scarf she hadn't worn since their happier days. The drive up was quiet but peaceful. Tall pine trees lined the road, and the soft hum of the radio filled the spaces between them. Emily glanced at Mark, who was focused on the road, his phone resting in the cup holder. He looked calm, even relaxed. She wanted to believe that meant something. Spider Ethan leaned his head against the window, watching the mountains grow larger. "It's beautiful," he murmured. Emily smiled, trying to match his excitement. "It is," she said softly. "It's just what we need." The cabin sat beside a clear lake that reflected the blue sky like glass. Birds chirped from nearby trees, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. Emily stepped out of the car and took a deep breath. For a moment, she felt the tension lift. Maybe this could really work. She started unpacking, setting the table for dinner while Mark checked his phone again. She noticed it, but said nothing. Instead, she called out, "Ethan, help me get the firewood, sweetheart." Her voice carried a cheerful tone she didn't quite feel. That evening, they cooked together grilled chicken, roasted potatoes, and marshmallows by the fire. The glow from the flames made everything look warm and perfect. Ethan laughed when his marshmallow caught fire, waving it around before blowing it out. Emily laughed too, her heart swelling at the sound. It'd been so long since she'd heard him laugh like that. Mark smiled faintly, but kept glancing at his phone. When it buzzed, he stood up quickly. "I'll take this outside," he said, walking toward the dark edge of the forest. Emily watched him go, pretending not to care. After dinner, when Mark returned, she asked gently, "Was it work again?" He nodded, sitting beside her. "Yeah, just some last-minute reports." His words sounded casual, practiced. Emily forced a small smile. "You work too hard," she said. He chuckled, not meeting her eyes. "Someone has to." Then he kissed her forehead lightly, like an old habit, before heading to bed. When the house went quiet, Emily stayed by the window, staring at the lake. The moon floated on the surface like silver glass. She hugged her knees and tried to remember the last time Mark had looked at her with warmth. It had been months, maybe a year. Something inside her whispered that he was slipping away, but she refused to listen. This trip was supposed to bring them closer. It couldn't be falling apart already. She thought about the woman she used to be, young, full of laughter, dreaming of adventures with Mark. Life had been easy back then. They were partners in everything. Now they barely shared a conversation. She wondered when exactly they had stopped talking and started pretending. The cabin creaked softly in the wind. Emily turned off the lights and sat alone in the dark, letting the silence wrap around her. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt hollow. She could hear the faint rhythm of Mark's voice outside again, low, hurried, like a secret. She tried to convince herself it was just work. People call late sometimes, right? But a small ache began to form in her chest. Something wasn't right. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, painting the room in gold. Mark was already outside, chopping wood, looking normal as ever. Emily decided to shake off the doubts. She made breakfast pancakes, bacon, and orange juice and called them both to eat. Mark complimented her cooking. Ethan cracked a joke, and for a moment it almost felt like old times. After breakfast, Ethan suggested a hike. Mark agreed, though he seemed distracted. They climbed up a small trail behind the cabin, surrounded by tall trees and birdsong. Emily walked behind them, watching her husband and son laugh together. She smiled, grateful for that small piece of happiness. When they reached a clearing, Ethan ran ahead, taking pictures of the lake below. Emily turned to Mark, her voice quiet. Do you ever miss how things used to be? Mark hesitated. We've both changed. Life's different now. She nodded, unsure what to say next. He put his hand on her shoulder for a moment, a gesture that felt more like comfort than love. Then his phone buzzed again, stepped away, answering it quickly. Emily's stomach tightened, but she forced herself to focus on the view instead of the voice she could hear in the distance. Later that afternoon, while Mark went to check the car, Ethan helped his mom prepare lunch. He was quieter than usual, glancing at her every so often. Finally, he asked softly, Mom, are you and Dad okay? Emily froze for a second, caught off guard. She turned, trying to hide her surprise behind a gentle smile. We're fine, sweetheart. Why do you ask? He shrugged, looking down. I don't know. You just seem sad. Her throat tightened. I'm just tired, she whispered, brushing his hair back. Trips take a lot out of moms, you know? Smiled weakly, but his eyes told her he didn't believe her. That night, as the fire crackled outside, Emily sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. Inside, she could hear Mark talking on his phone again. His voice was soft but urgent, filled with words she couldn't quite make out. She turned her eyes toward the stars, letting her mind drift. She wanted to believe this was just a phase, that love could still survive silence and distance. When Mark came outside, she pretended to be half asleep. He sat down beside her, looked at the lake and said, You okay? She nodded, whispering, just tired. He smiled faintly, stood and kissed her forehead before going inside. Emily stayed there long after he was gone, listening to the sound of the water brushing against the shore. The trip had only just begun, but something deep in her heart told her that whatever came next would change everything. She didn't know how or when, but she could feel it like a storm quietly forming in the distance. She closed her eyes, wrapped the blanket tighter, and whispered to herself, We'll be okay. But even she didn't believe it. Somewhere behind her, the cabin light flickered, and inside, her son was still awake, watching both of them with a worried heart. The night felt too quiet, too heavy with unspoken truths. And as the wind moved through the trees, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this family trip wasn't about fixing what was broken, was about finding out just how broken things already were. The second morning at the cabin began with golden sunlight streaming through the windows, but Emily felt no warmth. She had slept little, her mind chasing thoughts she didn't want to face. Mark was already outside, talking on his phone near the lake. From the kitchen window, she watched him pace back and forth, smiling in a way she hadn't seen in months, rhyme, relaxed, and not directed at her. Her stomach twisted, but she forced herself to look away. Today had to be better. She wouldn't let her doubts ruin the trip. Ethan came downstairs, his hair messy, still half asleep. Morning, Mom, he said, rubbing his eyes. She smiled weakly, placing a plate of pancakes in front of him. Morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep okay? He nodded, but his eyes flickered toward the window where his father was still talking. Who's Dad calling again? He asked casually. Emily tried to keep her tone calm. Probably someone from work. You know your dad? But she didn't know anymore. That realization stung. A few minutes later, Mark walked back in, pocketing his phone quickly. Sorry, he said, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Urgent call from the office. He kissed Emily's forehead and sat down to eat. She said nothing, just pushed her food around her plate. The breakfast table felt heavy with quiet tension. When Mark announced he was going to get more firewood from a shop down the road, Ethan offered to come along, but Mark shook his head. It's fine, buddy. Won't be long. As the car drove off, Emily started clearing the table. Ethan hesitated by the doorway, frowning. Mom, he said softly, can we talk for a second? His tone made her stop. She turned to him. Of course. He walked over, holding something in his hand, Mark's phone. I didn't mean to look, he said quickly, guilt flashing across his face. It buzzed when you were washing dishes, and I thought it was an emergency. But it wasn't. Emily felt her heart start to race. What do you mean? He handed her the phone. The screen was still lit with a text message. The words were simple, but they burned through her chest like fire. Wish you were here instead of with them. Miss you already. The name at the top was unfamiliar. Emily stared at it for a long moment, her breath catching in her throat. She felt the world tilt slightly, like the ground beneath her had shifted. Ethan spoke again, his voice shaking. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't want to hurt you. But I couldn't pretend I didn't see it. Emily's hands trembled as she locked the phone and placed it on the counter. She looked at her son's face, full of worry, innocence mixed with pain. Thank you for telling me, she said softly, forcing her voice to stay steady. You did the right thing. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. I just don't want you to be sad anymore. That broke her. She pulled him into her arms, hugging him tightly. It's okay, she whispered. I'll be fine. But her voice betrayed her. Her chest ached, her heart heavy with disbelief. She had suspected something, yes, but seeing proof was different. Proof made it real. For the next hour, she sat alone on the porch, staring at the lake. The sunlight shimmered on the surface, mocking the calm she couldn't feel. Her mind replayed every late-night phone call, every sudden work trip, every distant look Mark had given her over the past months. It all made sense now. She had been holding on to a version of him that no longer existed. When Mark returned, carrying a few logs in his arms, Emily had already wiped her tears. She smiled as he walked in, her voice calm. Everything okay? She asked. He nodded. Yeah, the store was further than I thought. Ethan glanced between them, saying nothing. Emily kept her face neutral, though inside her emotions swirled like a storm. Anger, sadness, confusion all tangled together. But above all, there was clarity. She finally knew the truth. That evening, they sat by the fire. Mark talked about plans for a future vacation, acting as if nothing was wrong. Emily listened quietly, her mind distant. She noticed how easily he spoke, how natural his lies sounded. She wondered when he had become so good at pretending. Ethan tried to keep the mood light. He roasted marshmallows, joked about the burned ones, and laughed when his mom smiled faintly. But he kept stealing glances at his parents, sensing the quiet battle unfolding between them. When it was time for bed, Emily pretended to be tired. Mark kissed her goodnight, then checked his phone again before turning away. In the darkness, Emily stared at the ceiling, her heart pounding. The phone screen's faint glow illuminated his face, calm, peaceful, unaware that she knew. She turned to face the wall, tears sliding silently onto her pillow. The next morning, she decided not to confront him. Not yet. She needed to think. She needed to understand what came next. She couldn't destroy their family without knowing what she wanted for herself and for Ethan. So she played her part. They went fishing by the lake just like they'd planned. Mark taught Ethan how to cast the line properly, his voice cheerful. Emily watched them, wondering how he could laugh so easily while carrying such a secret. The sunlight glimmered on the water, and for a fleeting moment, she almost forgot. Almost during lunch, Mark stepped away again to take another call. Emily didn't follow. She simply sat there, her hands gripping her cup, her face calm. Ethan watched her silently, knowing everything without needing words. Later that day, while cleaning the kitchen, she found a note tucked under Mark's phone. Keza, small paper heart drawn in pen with the initials M+L. It wasn't hers. That quiet ache returned, stronger now, like a wound she could no longer hide. That night, Mark suggested one last campfire before heading home the next morning. We should end the trip on a good note, he said lightly. Emily nodded, smiling faintly. She agreed because she didn't want to end it with anger. She wanted to end it with strength. As the fire crackled and the stars appeared, she sat beside Mark, pretending everything was fine. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, unaware that her heart was already miles away. Ethan sat across from them, watching the flames, sensing the distance that could no longer be covered by silence. Emily didn't speak. She didn't cry. She simply looked at the fire, knowing that the truth had changed everything. The woman who had arrived at the cabin hoping to save her marriage was gone. In her place sat someone stronger, hurt, yes, but no longer afraid to see things as they really were. When the fire died down and the night turned cold, she looked at her son and saw understanding in his eyes. He had been her quiet strength through it all. He had given her truth when she needed it most. As she walked back inside, she glanced one last time at Mark, who was smiling at his phone again. And in that moment, Emily knew this trip wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new one. The kind where she finally stopped pretending and started living for herself. The next morning began quietly, with mist rising over the lake and birds calling through the trees. Emily sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, her eyes fixed on the still water. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that message again. Wish you were here instead of with them. The words echoed like a drumbeat in her mind. She felt numb now, past the point of tears. Mark was still asleep, unaware that his secret had already surfaced. Inside the cabin, Ethan moved quietly, watching his mother with worried eyes. He had always known his mom was strong. But now she looked different, calm on the outside, yet fragile underneath. He wanted to protect her, but he was only 16. What could he do? Still, he couldn't stand seeing her like this. After breakfast, while Mark was on another work call, Ethan sat across from Emily and whispered, "Mom, I think we need to do something." She looked at him, confused. About what? He hesitated, then said firmly, "About Dad, about the truth." Emily sighed. "Ethan, I don't want you involved in this. It's between your father and me." But Ethan shook his head. "It's already involved me, Mom. I can't pretend I don't know." His voice cracked slightly. "You don't deserve to be lied to." Her heart ached at his words. She wanted to tell him everything would be okay, but she couldn't lie anymore. So she said the only thing that felt true, "I'll handle it. I promise." Ethan didn't argue, but he didn't stop thinking either. He knew his mom would protect him, even at her own expense, and he couldn't let that happen again. He decided to find out everything, not to hurt his dad, but to make sure his mom would never doubt her worth again, while Mark went into town for supplies. Ethan quietly took his father's phone from the nightstand. His hands shook as he unlocked it. The passcode hadn't changed. He opened the messages and began to read. There were dozens of texts, some short, some long. Each one told the same story. Late-night calls, secret meetings, and empty promises of someday. Ethan's chest tightened. He felt anger, sadness, and confusion all at once. His dad, the man he had admired, was not who he thought he was. But he didn't cry. Instead, he opened his laptop and saved screenshots of everything, not to expose or embarrass anyone, but to make sure his mom had proof. When he finished, he printed the messages quietly using the small travel printer his mom had brought for work. He folded the papers neatly and slipped them into an envelope. When Mark returned, Ethan acted normal, helping him unload groceries and talking about fishing. But inside, he was preparing for something big. He didn't tell his mom what he had done, not yet. That evening, the three of them went for a walk by the lake. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. From a distance, they might have looked like a perfect family. But beneath that calm image, tension simmered like fire under ice. Emily tried to enjoy the walk, focusing on the way the light danced across the water. But every time Mark reached for her hand, she felt nothing but emptiness. She knew she couldn't hide from the truth forever. She needed to decide what came next, to stay and keep pretending, or to leave and rebuild her life. The next morning, Ethan asked his mom to go for a walk without Mark. She agreed, grateful for the quiet. They followed a narrow path through the forest until they reached a clearing with a view of the lake below. The air smelled of pine and rain. Ethan stopped, turned to his mother, and pulled out the folded papers. "I need to show you something," he said softly. She frowned, confused. "What is it?" He handed her the envelope. "I backed up Dad's messages before he could delete them." Emily froze, staring at him. "Ethan, you didn't. I had to," he interrupted. "You deserve the truth, Mom. I saw how you looked last night. I couldn't let you keep wondering." She slowly unfolded the papers, her hands trembling. The words stared back at her, texts filled with warmth, laughter, and affection that didn't belong to her. Her eyes blurred as she read them. Not because she was surprised, but because seeing them written down made it final. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The forest around them was silent, except for the distant sound of the wind moving through the trees. Finally, Emily folded the papers back and handed them to Ethan. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice steady. "You've been very brave." Ethan shook his head. "I just want you to be happy." She smiled weakly, tears forming again. "I will be. I just need time." As they walked back, Emily felt something she hadn't in a long time. Clarity. The pain was still there, sharp and real, but beneath it was a quiet strength. She wasn't going to shout or fight. She wasn't going to beg. She would simply move forward. When they reached the cabin, Mark was sitting by the fire, looking relaxed. "Where have you two been?" he asked cheerfully. "I thought we could go canoeing before dinner." Then glanced at his mother, but she only smiled politely. "That sounds nice," she said. Her calmness made Mark blink, but he didn't question it. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the three of them went out on the lake. Mark laughed and pointed out birds flying overhead, pretending everything was normal. Ethan paddled quietly, his jaw tight. Emily sat between them, her face calm, her thoughts miles away. After dinner, while Mark cleaned up, Ethan and his mom sat by the fire. He looked at her, hesitant. "Are you going to tell him?" "Not yet," she said softly. "Sometimes silence says more than words." Ethan nodded slowly, understanding that his mother wasn't afraid anymore. She was waiting not for an explanation, but for the right moment to let go. That night, Emily stood outside the cabin looking at the stars. Ethan joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She smiled at him. "You've grown up so fast," she whispered. He looked up at her. "You taught me how." She placed a hand on his cheek, pride shining through the sadness. "You're stronger than you know, Ethan." The next morning, she packed her suitcase quietly, while Mark was still asleep. Not because she was leaving yet, but because she wanted to be ready. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, tired, older, no longer broken. Ethan helped her carry the bags to the car, pretending they were just preparing for the trip home. But both of them knew this was more than that. This was the start of something new. As they loaded the last bag, Mark stepped outside, yawning. "Packing already?" he asked. Emily turned and smiled gently. "Yes, I think it's time to go." He didn't know she meant more than just the cabin. Ethan glanced at his father, then at his mother. For the first time, he saw strength in her eyes, not anger, not fear, but peace. And in that moment, he understood the real meaning of love. It wasn't about holding on. It was about knowing when to let go. As they drove away from the cabin later that morning, Ethan looked back through the window one last time. The lake shimmered in the distance, calm and endless, like a promise of something better ahead. He reached over, took his mother's hand, and smiled. She squeezed it back, her eyes fixed on the road. For the first time in a long while. Emily felt free. The last morning at the cabin began quietly, the kind of stillness that feels heavy before a storm. The lake was calm, mist curling over its surface like a secret. Emily woke early, long before Mark or Ethan stirred. She made coffee and stood by the window, staring at the water. Today felt different. There was no confusion left, no wondering what to do. The truth was clear now, and she was finally ready to face it. Mark came downstairs a while later, looking relaxed, humming softly as if the world hadn't changed. "Morning," he said with a smile. "Smells good?" Emily handed him a cup of coffee, her hands steady. "Mark," she said gently, "we need to talk." He looked at her, surprised by her calm tone. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting the cup down. "I know," she said simply. Her eyes didn't waver. "I know about her." The color drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. "Please don't," she interrupted quietly. "I've seen the messages. I know everything." Mark's shoulders slumped. For a moment, he looked like he might deny it again, But then he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Emily, it's not what you think. He started, but she raised a hand. Mark, stop. Don't explain. I'm not angry anymore. I just wanted you to know that I know. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. That frightened him more than anger would have. He sat down, staring at the table. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said quietly. It just happened. Emily nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes but not falling. Things don't just happen, Mark. Choices do. The air between them was thick with silence. From the other room, they heard Ethan moving, but he didn't come in. He must have sensed what was happening and decided to give them space. Mark finally looked up. What now? Emily took a deep breath. Now, I move forward. I'm not sure what that looks like yet, but I know I can't keep pretending everything is fine. Not for you, not for me, and not for Ethan. He opened his mouth to speak, but she shook her head again. Please don't apologize. Just listen. I spent months trying to fix what I didn't break. I gave you love, patience, and trust, and you gave your attention to someone else. I deserve better than that. Her words were not sharp. They were soft but carried the weight of finality. Mark looked down again, his voice low. Are you leaving me? She didn't answer right away. She just looked out the window at the lake. I don't know yet, she said finally. But I am leaving this version of us, the one where I keep pretending not to see what's right in front of me. He nodded slowly, understanding that the woman standing before him wasn't the same one who had walked into this trip hoping to save their marriage. This Emily was calm, steady, and strong. Ethan came into the room then, quiet but alert. He looked between them and understood instantly. You told him? He asked softly. Emily nodded. Yes, sweetheart. I did. Mark's eyes softened as he looked at his son. Ethan, I'm sorry, but Ethan cut him off gently. It's okay, Dad. I just want Mom to be happy. The simplicity of his words hit both of them hard. Emily placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder and gave it a small squeeze. We'll be okay, she said firmly, though her heart ached. They spent the rest of the morning packing in silence. Mark tried to help, but Emily preferred to keep busy alone. Every folded shirt and closed suitcase felt like closing a chapter of her life. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees as if the forest itself was whispering goodbye. When the car was finally loaded, Mark stood by the porch, watching Emily and Ethan prepare to leave. You're really going? He asked quietly. She nodded. I need time to think. I'll stay with my sister for a while. It's not forever, but it's what I need right now. He stepped forward, emotion finally cracking through his voice. Emily, please. We can fix this. I'll end it, I promise. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression kind but firm. You can't fix what you broke with promises, Mark. It takes honesty, and you've stopped giving that a long time ago. Tears filled his eyes, but she turned away before he could speak again. She didn't want her final memory of this place to be more pain. As she got into the car, Ethan sat beside her, clutching his backpack. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The engine started, and the sound echoed softly across the quiet woods. Mark stood in the driveway, watching them drive away, his figure growing smaller in the rearview mirror. The drive down the mountain was silent at first. Emily kept her eyes on the road, focused and determined. The forest blurred past, green and gold under the rising sun. After a few minutes, Ethan broke the silence. Are you okay, Mom? She took a breath and smiled faintly. I will be. Maybe not today, but soon. He nodded, leaning back in his seat. You're strong, you know that? She chuckled softly. I wasn't. Not until you reminded me. They stopped once at a gas station, grabbing snacks and stretching their legs. Emily looked at Ethan, realizing how much he'd grown not just in height, but in strength, in kindness. He had seen something no child should have to see, yet he had handled it with maturity and grace. That thought filled her with both pride and sadness. When they reached the city, Emily didn't go home. She drove straight to her sister Claire's house. Claire opened the door, worry etched on her face, but Emily just smiled and said, I need a place to stay for a bit. Claire hugged her tightly without asking questions. That night, after dinner, Emily sat outside on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The stars above were faint, but the air was warm and soft. Ethan joined her, holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "Do you miss him already?" he asked carefully. She thought for a moment before answering. "I miss who he used to be," she said softly, "but I don't miss the lies." They sat in silence, sipping cocoa, the sound of crickets filling the night. For the first time in months, Emily felt at peace. There was pain, yes, but it was clean pain, the kind that heals instead of festers. Days passed and life slowly settled into something new. Emily found work at a small local design studio. Ethan started at a new school, making friends quickly. The nights grew lighter, the mornings calmer. Sometimes she caught herself thinking about Mark, wondering if he regretted everything. But she no longer felt trapped by those thoughts. One evening, as she watched Ethan laughing with Claire's kids in the yard, she realized something powerful. The trip that had started as an attempt to save her marriage had ended up saving her instead. She had found herself again, piece by piece. Weeks later, Mark called. His voice was quiet, full of guilt. "I'm sorry, Emily," he said. "Truly." She listened, then replied softly, "I know, and I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back." After the call ended, she sat on the porch again, watching the sunset. The sky turned shades of gold and red, and she smiled, not out of sadness, but relief. Ethan came out and sat beside her. "Do you think things will ever be the same again?" he asked. She smiled gently. "No," she said, "but maybe they'll be better." He nodded, and they sat together, the soft breeze carrying away the last pieces of the past. That family trip had begun as a desperate attempt to fix what was broken. But it ended with something unexpected: freedom, honesty, and a new beginning. Emily had lost a marriage, yes, but she had gained something far greater: her strength, her peace, and a bond with her son that no betrayal could ever destroy.